Hello, hello, welcome. I'm really excited to be here today, back with a great friend of mine who I'll introduce a little bit more in a minute. But before we do that, let's run the intro. If I can find it. It's been a minute. Find the buttons, Nicole. Here we go. Hi, I'm Nicole, and as you have probably guessed, I have ADHD. I live and breathe all things ADHD in my personal, family, and professional life. I have a background in psychology and special education, and I've gained a lot of knowledge over the years about ADHD, what it really is, how it touches every aspect of your life and the life of your child, as well as a wealth of information and strategies for living with ADHD and parenting kids with ADHD. In this community, we share stories, we learn together, and we support each other as we navigate all things ADHD. Welcome. All right, I'm really excited to get started today. My guest today, and we will have, slow down. My guest today is my awesome friend, Dr. Susan Blumberg. She and I met, years ago in a clubhouse room and connected, and just our approaches to things just vibed really well. We started doing a weekly clubhouse room for over a year. We did that. Then we switched over to Instagram Live for a while. We've had a bit of a hiatus, but really excited to be back at it with Susan. She is a wealth of knowledge, and we tend to agree pretty closely on most of these topics. So we're going to be getting together live for an hour on Tuesdays like we did for so long. I'm really excited to have her here. I'm going to bring her on. Well, welcome, Susan.
Hello, Nicole, my favorite co-host.
We have a great time together. Sometimes
Yes.
we get a little off topic, and that's usually my fault.
That's called ADHD.
Uh-huh. But yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back with you. I'm Dr. Susan Blumberg. I started out as a clinical psychologist for 25 years, seeing children, teens, adults, families, and couples. And for almost 9 years now, I've been a life coach for teens, young adults, and parents, focusing on communication, executive functioning, and launching teens and young adults into the next stage of wherever they are, whether that's high school, college, or into adulthood. And the reason I switched from being a psychologist into being a coach is while I really love doing therapy and helping children, teens, adults, whatever, really explore their emotions, what I liked best was teaching skills and strategies. And just like a sports coach, we teach skills and strategies and the rules of the game. And then we send people out there into their lives to practice, learn to be independent, work on their skills. And then we come back together, we tweak, we learn, and we launch out there again. And it's been really gratifying and satisfying. So I have two twice exceptional kids of my own, meaning that they're both gifted and carry disability labels, including ADHD in the case of my kids. I'm married to a husband with ADHD. So that's in my household as much as it is in yours, Nicole.
Almost as much.
Almost
I have one more kid
right?
than you
But
do.
you have yourself. I'm the executive functioning brain of my family. They tell me that all the time. And so I do specialize in working with that twice exceptional population, though my kids are both young adults now in their 20s. And so that has given me the opportunity to not just work with these families, but to live in that household so I understand what the families I work with are really going through. I'm also the co-author of a number of books on communication and relationships, and one on parenting children with sensory processing disorder. So I come to this from quite a different number of different perspectives, which I think gives me a really well-rounded approach that I'm always happy to share with our audience.
Absolutely. I know personally, when I don't know what to do, I call Susan.
Oh,
She
that's such a
is
compliment.
a
Thank you.
wealth of knowledge and has helped me through some tricky things with my own kids and with other members of our family, just because her experience is so vast. So I'm really excited that we're back doing this again. And since we're trying to keep these to an hour, and I do have a hard stop today because I've got to get kiddos places this afternoon,
Sounds good.
I guess we'll just jump into the topic. If you're here in the chat, feel free to post any questions you might have today. So we decided the best place for us to start is going to be talking about executive functioning. So we're going to kind of break that down over the next 8 weeks. And we're going to start today with impulse control, which, it factors in all of those executive functions that we talk about, but is definitely, one of the defining characteristics of ADHD. So I guess let's just start out with kind of a definition. Why is it such an issue? And what does it look like? So if you had a kind of a quick definition of impulse control, Susan, what would you say?
Well, I think, I'm interested in what you think it is, honestly, before I give you the official formal definition.
Okay.
Honestly, what do you think is impulse control? What's your definition, Nicole?
The best description I can give is kind of the race car analogy, right? A zooming race car with no brakes. It's kind of that ability to stop and think before your mouth goes or your body acts.
Love it. That works. That works. Because it's actually a condition that makes it difficult to control your actions or reactions. That's kind of the formal definition.
Great.
So I love that race car. It's like not having brakes.
Yes.
Right? Perfect.
And our brains are moving a million miles an hour. So we've got, our Ferrari brain that has tricycle brakes.
That is so cute. Isn't that from Dr. Hallowell?
Yeah, it's either Hallowell or Barkley.
No, it is. It's Hallowell.
Those are my two.
And that's from his ADHD book. He's a tremendous expert, and I attend every workshop he gives. I recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, those are my top two.
Hallowell,
Barkley, and then Dawson and Guari for executive functioning stuff.
Right.
Those are my go-tos.
Right. So excellent. And so it's very interesting because we think of people with ADHD as being impulsive. And it also includes, let me say, a number of learning disabilities as well as autism have impulse control issues. It's not specific just to ADHD, but it is one of the defining characteristics of people who have hyperactive ADHD or combined type. It is not characteristic of people who have inattentive type ADHD. So I want to be clear about our definitions. Very important at this stage of the game. So impulse control is when you feel that you cannot stop yourself from taking an action, saying something inappropriate, engaging in a behavior that could be eating, it could be gambling, it could be sex, it could be shopping, it could be using a screen, that may be inappropriate, but you feel like you can't stop yourself. And so, of course, the neurotypical response is what? Count to 10, take a deep breath. Well, if we could do those things, we probably wouldn't have any of these disability labels. So I want to be clear that I'm not going to say to you to do any of those things today because they don't work for us.
Right.
Right? It's really important that we know those are excellent interventions for people who are neurotypical. but they are not
Right.
excellent interventions for people who have many of these disability labels. Because the problem is, if you're impulsive, it means there's changes in your neurological wiring, right? This is built into your brain as
Yeah.
part of these disability labels. And so therefore, if you could take a deep breath, you would have done it already.
Right. It's, what's his name? Dr. Green, explosive child, right? Kids do well if they can. Adults too, right? If we
That
could.
is my mantra. Kids can do well if they can. The other mantra I have is that behavior is communication. Also from Dr. Ross Green. And his website is livesinthebalance.org, and where he explains all of his collaborative approaches. And I know that we will address that in a future podcast.
We will definitely. That's its whole own.
We'll take several sessions for that.
Probably.
So let's come back to the impulse control. The issue with impulse control is that we act on what we think, or we say what we think, without considering the consequences. Right. Okay, I'm going to say it again. We act or say what we think without considering the consequences.
Yes. So,
and go ahead, Nicole.
I kind of want to just back up and talk about kind of why that is, right? You briefly touched on, brain operates differently, but there has been a lot of research done on kind of what the differences are in the brain, right? So we know people with ADHD brains don't produce enough of primarily dopamine, but also norepinephrine. And so those are kind of those rewarding, slow down, being able to kind of reflect sort of chemicals. So our brains are kind of always seeking that dopamine, right? We're chasing that, follow the dopamine is what, what's his name on TikTok always says. But that seeking of that dopamine, right? And that inability to stop.
Dr. Barkley talks
factor
about
in there.
This,
yeah, but Dr. Barkley talks about dopamine, the dopamine. And that's why, medications like stimulants work, is they stimulate the production and the retention of those chemicals in our brains, help us to kind of develop some of those breaks. But so let's just talk a little bit about kind of what impulsivity and a lack of impulse control looks like kind of on a practical purpose, right? So in kids, that's going to be the kid who blurts out in class, strong emotional responses, that acting without thinking, arguing with parents is a big one. With littler kids, kind of running off in public, darting out into the street to chase a ball. For me, I always say my kids are saying the quiet part out loud, right? Those thoughts that we all have when someone tells us something we don't want to hear, or someone asks us to do something we don't want to do. We might think, gosh, you're so stupid, but we don't say it out loud.
Adults say that. Kids don't say that.
Kids with ADHD, oh, yes, they do.
Kids don't have that additional layer of consciousness necessarily, not until you teach it to them.
Yeah. So, this is kind of, it's what, research is showing about 50% of kids with ADHD also have ODD. And so that comes out.
Meaning, explain the definition.
Oppositional defiant disorder. We've talked about that before.
Okay. I didn't know that. So
it's okay. It's always good because we always have new viewers. So that kind of automatic arguing response that, put those walls up. That's usually how I can tell with some of my kids if we need to make medication adjustments, is that oppositional defiant gets stronger. They're able to control it a lot better when they have more impulse control, because they're able to stop and think before they just say it out loud. Sneaking food, sneaking candy, things like that, which then often leads to lying about it later. The classic hallmark is the, parents and adults who are working with these kids will always be like, why did you do that? And the answer is, I don't know. And they really don't know.
They really don't.
Because there isn't really a reason behind it. It's just brain fired and action.
I want to add to that. It baffles neurotypical parents in particular, because there's always a reason for an adult.
Right.
One of the issues that we have to teach parents is there is not a logical reason, and kids can't explain. That's one of the reasons you can understand that this is a impulsive behavior, because they cannot explain why they have behaved in this way.
Right. So in adults, so when we talk about executive skills,
my computer has unplugged and I'm plugging it back in.
Oh, no problem. I was saying something and I lost it because ADHD. When we talk about executive skills, these are things that all brains have to develop, right? The difference with people with ADHD is some of them never develop appropriately, and all of them are delayed in their development. Dr. Russell Barkley always says that, ADHD kids are about 30% behind in developing these kinds of skills. So when you think about that, what the expectation you might have for a 12, 13-year-old, their executive development is going to be delayed by about 30%. So that's looking at like 8, 9 years old.
Yes.
No worries, Koala. Go ahead. Replay Curler is great. It's good to see you today.
Let's also remember that this is part of the prefrontal cortex. We're talking about the neurotransmitters that people with ADHD and some other disorders are looking for, the dopamines and norepinephrines. But this also has to do with the development of your prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functioning, or the planning, organizing part of your thinking is. And so if that part of your brain is slower to develop, because of the impact, again, I said this has to do with your neurological wiring in your brain, so to speak. So it's not just the neurotransmitters, but it actually has to do with the formation of your brain itself.
Which is why, ADHD and autism are both neurodevelopmental disorders. The brain develops differently. So we now know that even neurotypical brains are not done developing until basically 25, about age 25, right? 25. So you're looking, even those neurotypical brains are going to not have all of these skills for a very long time. So we're thinking, but when we're approaching kind of our kids who are maybe early teens, teenagers, and their executive skills, their impulse control are going to be more like, an 8, 9-year-old, that's a pretty big difference when you think about how you would interact with a 16-year-old and how you might interact with a 11, 12-year-old with some of these things. So it's always a good thing to just always have in the back of your mind that I can't expect, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we're talking about what to do about impulse control. Yes. But let's talk a little bit about what impulse control looks like, or problems with impulse control look like in adults.
Very good. So unfortunately, these are adults where they may be unable to keep a job because they're unable to plan and organize around job-related skills. They may have difficulties, as I already mentioned, with spending money, gambling, food. They may have difficulty with hygiene. They may have difficulty with relationships because they're unable to manage the give and take of a relationship. And you would think, well, that's social skills, but it's not just social skills, because a big chunk of social skills is being able to hold your mouth and listen to what somebody else is saying.
I was going to say,
and not just say what's on the top of your head, right?
Yeah. So at the top of my list of what does impulse control look like in adults is interrupting others, right?
Exactly, like we just did to each other, right? So it has to do with, it can affect your career, your job, your caretaking of yourself and others. If you're married or have children, it can look like caring for your apartment. You're not doing your I work with a lot of my young adult clients on their laundry and their cleaning. And I have a client, she's 25, she still lives at home, but she has a job and she's not quite able financially to swing moving out yet. She was eating chicken fingers with mustard on her mom's white couch, and she left the mustard stain on the couch until mom got home. And I looked at her and said, who doesn't think of Googling how to remove mustard from the white couch before mom comes home? And she looked at me blankly because that never occurred to her. She just said, I didn't know how to do it, so I left it for mom.
Yep.
Mom was furious. This is actually an impulse issue because she didn't think about the consequences of eating mustard on the white couch, and she never thought about how to clean it up. But those are all impulsive issues related to ADHD because she was not acting as an adult when she could have taken care of the whole issue, and her mother would have never known about it.
Yeah. And, there's other executive skills that all come into play that go
we'll
like
deal
this,
with those in other
but
sessions.
We'll talk about later.
Just think about the impulsiveness. How many neurotypical adults would eat chicken fingers with mustard on a white couch? I mean, you have a napkin, you have a tray, you put down a towel. There's lots of steps there. Because she was impulsive, she didn't even have a napkin. She just never thought about the consequences. And that's a sign of impulsiveness.
Yeah. Some other things that come up that I had written on my list, road rage, impulse buying, starting projects and hobbies and switching them frequently, risky
now, I'm
behaviors like adrenaline injection.
I'm going to say that's not necessarily impulsiveness.
Well, yes.
So not being able to complete tasks is not necessary. There's a difference.
No, but not completing the task, but starting the new things is the impulse control.
But I'm going to say not completing them is a different issue.
It's the flitting from thing to thing, and this grabbed my attention. I'm going to go buy $100 worth of crafts for this one thing.
That's impulsive, but not completing the task. We'll get to that in another session.
Right. And as I said, all of these executive functions work together and cause lots of problems. So we talked a little bit about kind of some of the cons, right, of these impulse control issues. And so a lot of that is going to be, we've got risky behaviors are going to lead to poor outcomes a lot of the time. But social relationships are really impacted by these impulse control issues.
So I brought it up already.
Yeah. So,
but not just that, but also being able to look ahead and see the impact of what you're saying or doing on the other person. I've already said that one of the side issues of impulsive behavior is thinking or acting without thinking about the consequences. And that's huge in social relationships, whether you're a child or an adult.
And, in particular, thinking about how your actions are going to impact the other person, not just what might the consequences be for me, but how is it going to impact other people?
Exactly.
This is a book that my husband recommends frequently in his practice, The
ADHD
Effect on Marriage, and we read it at home too.
It's a very good book.
Yeah. There was one thing I wanted to kind of read out here. Let's see. Ask a person with ADHD why he brings home a pound of chocolate but only half of what was on the grocery list, or why he just spent $100 on gifts when he knew you needed the money to pay the electric bill, and he might say, I don't know. This would be an accurate description of the impulsivity of the moment. But now, in fact, you do know people with untreated ADHD have really bad breaks. It's difficult for someone who doesn't have ADHD to understand this lack of impulse control. People with ADHD expect that adults have learned how to control their impulses in their own and others' best interest, yet are faced over and over again with the fact that this is not the case for their spouses. ADHD partners can blurt out hurtful comments, ruin family finances, start affairs on a whim, or give in to road rage because their untreated brains don't have brakes. All of it is emotionally painful for the non-ADHD spouse and often for the ADHD spouse as well. Not meaning to hurt someone, however, isn't enough. Overwhelming depth, the emotional sting of too much honesty or an affair can all tear relationships apart. It's important that the ADHD spouse consider impulsiveness as a symptom that needs treatment, not just part of a happy-go-lucky personality.
What goes along with that in children is when people say boys will be boys.
Yes.
That's often people will not treat ADHD in boys and dismiss their impulsive behaviors. It's exactly all the things you've listed there. When people say boys will be boys, instead of treating the behaviors that the boys are showing, all those behaviors you see is say, oh, they're just an easygoing person. They're spontaneous. They go with the flow. And instead they're damaging their relationship.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about what some of the pros might be to some of that impulse control, because it's not all doom and gloom, right?
No. Let's talk about some of the really successful people with ADHD. Do you have a couple in mind?
Not necessarily. But if you do, that's
okay,
great.
Let's start with Steven Spielberg, who's one of the most creative filmmakers. Richard Branson, who is an incredibly successful businessman. I always think of those two at the top of my list. There are many great painters, actors, and actresses with ADHD that I think are really important. I'm going to give myself a quick moment to.
Sure. But let's just talk about kind of some of the traits of these people, right? Creativity, people, that's impulse control, those random firings of the brain.
Michael Phelps, Simone Biles?
Yes.
Solange Knowles, who's the sister of Beyonce and a famous singer in her own right. Emma Watson, who played Hermione in the Harry Potter movies. Channing Tatum, who's also a famous actor. Jamie Oliver, a famous chef. Everyone loves Ryan Gosling recently, since he played Ken in the Barbie movie. How about Michael Jordan, one of the most famous basketball players of all times? And of course, the most famous of all is Albert Einstein, who was kicked out of school for poor performance and is one of the greatest geniuses of all time. How about Bill Gates?
In our community, a lot of people love Johnny Depp. We learned in that trial that he has ADHD as well. So the, kind of the traits that we're talking about these people is this creativity and the ability to think outside the box, because we're not hindered by kind of those breaks of this is not possible, right?
Correct.
Ideas of what could be possible come really easily, and are people with ADHD are extremely passionate about those ideas. They follow their personal convictions with less hesitation. The impulsive ADHD people are great in a party. They're fun and gregarious generally.
Again, let's say not necessarily people with inattentive ADHD.
Who
can be very shy. Both my husband and son are incredibly unsocial and shy.
Yes, the hyperactive ADHDers tend to be more extroverted, or at least are extroverted introverts, right? They may need to They may need to go back and recharge, but people, because of this sign of lack of impulse control, they're better at kind of,
as long as they're not drinking,
being able to kind of go out there and meet people and connect easily with other people.
As long as they're not drinking or using other drugs, which can be an issue, and we should address that too, because that can be an impulse control issue.
Yes, again, that risky behavior, and not knowing when to stop, right?
So, I mean, I think we have to say, a client with ADHD, an adult client with ADHD, said to me yesterday that he met an employee's family yesterday, and for the first time in his life, the whole family was sharing, oh, not just our son has ADHD, I have it too, and an uncle has it. And for the first time in a setting with people he didn't know, he felt able to share, I have it too. And it brought him to tears because it felt so normal in this setting. He usually feels his ADHD is a terrible thing he has to hide. But this family really normalized, 4 out of the 6 members of the family have diagnoses. Some got it as kids, most got it as adults. And he felt for the first time not ashamed to say to strangers, yes, I have ADHD too. And this was a very positive experience for him because he wasn't ashamed to say, yes, I live with ADHD also. And it was a really powerful experience for him. And he said that the mom of the family said, I think of my ADHD as a superpower, which is very popular and controversial on social media right now, right? But it's because some people see it as driving their passion, giving them energy, giving them creativity, as opposed to seeing the downside of it, as my client does, where he sees it as interfering with his executive functioning, interfering with his ability to parent his child well, breaking up his marriage and so on. And so it's just a 180 shift for him, and how this family was not ashamed of their ADHD, where he has always lived with feeling it as a shameful thing. And so that's why it's so important to talk about the pros of it.
Yes. Well, and that's really why I started this channel and wanted to build this community to begin with, is because I have seen the power of that, of having the community that can speak about it and empower each other and learn together. And it is, both sides of that coin are there. There are pros and there are superpowers about ADHD if they're harnessed appropriately, but it is also extremely difficult and it can feel like a huge barrier at times. And I think it's important to talk about both sides of that.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you did. I think what's really important for people to know is that it doesn't have to be a struggle. There are accommodations and supports and strategies. We have no cure for this because it's not something a pill can make go away, because it's in your brain, as we already talked about. It has to do, I always touch my head, with the neurological wiring in your brain. There's a huge amount of evidence that shows it runs in families. It can be genetic. It has to do with the wiring in your brain that you're born with. This is not something you get by catching a germ, that we can give you a pill and the germ goes away. This is the way you're born. It has to do with your genotype versus your phenotype. If you understand genetics, my daughter studied it in school. Your phenotype is what you're born with. Your phenotype is what you look like. So it's in your brain. We can't change it. But this seems like a good segue. We're halfway through our time to talk about, there are great coping skills. There are medications that help. There are treatments that help. And you can have a successful life, both in relationships, careers, personally, with ADHD, because we know so much. After, you have to understand, this has been studied for 100 years now, literally, and has gone through.
Now, only for the last 10 years has it been studied in people who are not boys 12 and under, but we're getting there.
Well, it's actually been a little longer than that. My daughter has been receiving treatment for 20 years herself. So it has been studied for a little bit longer than that, Nicole. My daughter started taking Ritalin literally 20 years ago. So it has been a little bit longer than that, but I'm a little older than you, and I've been working in the field just a little bit longer.
There's definitely been a huge increase in research on how ADHD impacts adults, in particular, adult women,
and women
in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, but there is quite a bit of research about girls and teens that's gone on a little bit longer, since I know my daughter's been on Ritalin for 20 years. She was 9 years old and she turned 29 in May. So I have a long-term case study in my own home.
There you go.
So
Well,
is that okay
look,
if
we're
we
talking about
segue?
genetics. Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
my family is a little bit being recruited to one of the genome projects with us because we now have 4 generations of women with
Oh,
ADHD in my
excellent.
family. So
I encourage everyone who has the
yeah,
opportunity to participate in those studies.
yep. So they want our blood for their study.
Well, my daughter also has autism, and we participated in one of the genetic studies for autism. And surprisingly, she showed none of the known genes related to autism. But my daughter was a 24-week preemie weighing 1 pound, 11 ounces. And so we do think that damage done
Yeah,
because of her extreme premature birth is likely the cause. Though, of course, she does have a father with ADHD. And, my son also has ADHD and anxiety disorder. And she has 5 or 6 disability labels. On
sure.
the other hand, she's also what's considered profoundly gifted, up in the top 1%. And, that also does run in my family. And so we deal with this twice exceptional component, which we'll talk about in another episode, and that
Yeah.
presents its own issues. So I want to talk a little bit about, if we could, since we only have half an hour, less than half an hour now, to talk about how we intervene with impulse control, because there are strategies for this. And a lot of people, again, as I said, think you take a deep breath or you count to 10, which only works with neurotypical people.
Right. Because that requires you to think about stopping and counting to 10 before you act, and that's the whole problem, right? So
Right.
yeah,
And
what
so,
do we do?
right. So if you could do that, then you were neurotypical and you don't have to be here listening to us. So there are a number of things that you can do. And I have the list in front of me. And of course,
That's okay. You go ahead and find it. We'll talk about a little bit. I mean, with impulse control in particular, that is one of the things that is very treatable with medication. It's one of the things that
yes,
that medication helps with the most is going to be that impulse control issue. So I know not every medication is not for everyone, and that's totally fine. But that is kind of when it comes to the research, usually medication first. It helps a lot with that. It does not help with a lot of other executive functions, but with impulse control, it does.
so I want to say, because now that study is 40 years old, there's a huge study that started 40 years ago that proves quite clearly that medication alone or behavioral treatment alone, while they work, a combination approach is significantly the most effective approach to treating ADHD. So
Right.
I want to be very clear about it, that
Yes.
while meds alone are useful and behavioral treatment alone is useful, the combination approach is
Yes.
considered best practices for treatment of
Absolutely.
ADHD.
Yeah, there's a
And
huge longitudinal study,
yes,
and all of the results always are showing
always.
combined approach has not just like that this much effect plus this much effect of the other two,
It's
but
multiple.
multiplied.
Right.
Yeah.
And the
So,
treatment of choice is cognitive behavioral therapy,
yes.
which is a therapy that looks at, and I'm trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist, I want to be clear,
So
that
you're
the
showing your
way,
bias.
yes, no, I chose to do that because it's proven to be best practice
Right.
for many types of
Yes.
disorders.
Yes.
I chose it on purpose when I trained
Mhm.
40 years ago. um, I
When you
graduated with
began
my
training 40 years ago,
Yeah, I
you've done
started training
continual
40
training
years
since
ago.
that.
Yes, I've done additional training since then, but I graduated with my PhD in 1991. Um, and cognitive behavioral therapy says that if you can change your thoughts and feelings or attitudes, it changes your behavior. And so it's a very skills and strategies oriented approach, which is how I came to coaching. And because that's really the key thing to changing behavior. But how does that work on impulse control? So obviously, one of the key things here is developing strategies that deal with impulse control.
We got a comment here. I've seen a lot of
Yes.
ADHD women complain that CBT didn't or doesn't help them. I did CBT and found it helpful. I'm curious to hear your take. So
that's a really interesting question. One big piece of it is CBT works as well as much energy as you put into it. It's not passive talk therapy, which is traditional therapy. CBT requires homework. You must put in time to practice the skills and strategies that you learn. And this is
I will add there real quick. If
Yes.
you are going to a therapist and they are claiming to do cognitive behavioral therapy and they're not giving you homework, they might not be
a CBT. You have to ask them if they're CBT trained. You should be getting homework such as journaling, practicing behaviors. You should be setting behavioral goals and checking in on a monthly or every 3-month basis to see if those goals are being met. And then new goals get set and you work on skills and strategies towards those goals. If there's
not every therapist is for every person, right?
I'm sorry, Nicole, let me finish my sentence. Give me a second. We're interrupting each other. If you don't have a treatment plan of that kind, where you're having homework, working towards that goal, and that homework is being checked on every week, and then you're learning new skills and strategies, then you're not doing CBT. The other piece of it is you're not talking about your childhood. You're not talking about, you're not spending your sessions just debriefing about a fight you had that week or an incident that happened, but you're talking about how your thoughts and behaviors are impacting the choices that you're making.
Yes.
And so an individual talk therapist is not necessarily CBT trained. They must be specifically trained. And
a lot of therapists will have multiple approaches. So they might include CBT and be, talking about other things.
Trained. If they say they're eclectic and they use several different strategies, you're not receiving CBT. So that's a key issue. This is a very good question. The last piece is by taking medication and thinking you now are going to change, medication brings your brain into a homeostasis where you're ready to learn new skills. And the saying is, pills don't teach skills. So you need the medication to help you stop being impulsive, to stop you having racing thoughts, to help you sleep better, to bring you into a state of mind where a CBT therapist or a DBT therapist, and I'll say what that is in a sec, is ready to teach you the skills you need. If you're having impulsive thoughts and behaviors, if you're having racing thoughts, if you're not able to sleep well, then you're not able to learn the skills and then practice them. DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, is CBT plus mindfulness training. And they have both individual and group sessions, where CBT is generally individual. Now, one of the first strategies I was going to say for learning how to control your impulses is to practice mindfulness, which is why DBT was created, because a lot of people found that CBT alone was good, but practicing mindfulness really helped. Mindfulness exercises, meditations, being aware of your intentions and having a positive growth mindset was really helpful in controlling impulsivity.
And a lot of that, is developing that self-awareness to be able to identify the thought so that you can do the things that you're learning in CBT.
So the second intervention is self-monitoring, which is paying attention to your behaviors when you're impulsive and learning strategies to turn that around. So with one impulsive young adult client I have now, he was saying a lot of negative things to his wife. And rather than have that turn in, degrading into a big fight, he was even throwing things before we started working together a year ago. We started talking about when he says things with a hard impact, because he likes baseball, and a soft impact. And now he's at the point, if he starts to use a negative tone of voice or say something with rude words, he's not stopping himself. He can't do that think before you speak yet, but he's able to say, wait, let me rephrase that.
Right.
Before the fight starts. And so he's learning to identify his hard impact statements. That's a huge help with impulse control. He's self-monitoring.
We got a follow-up comment here, so I'm just going to pull this up. It says, the impression I've gotten from those posts is that it feels to them as though it's not understanding them and asking them to do something they can't. I struggle with how to think about that because I have learned from my therapist. And a big part of, finding a therapist is finding someone who does understand ADHD.
You might have to change your therapist.
And it is, when you're looking for a therapist, a lot of therapists are going to write out a list of like 15 things that they do, and ADHD might be one of them. That they might be great with ADHD, but they might not. And a personal connection, all the studies on therapy from years and years ago, that relationship piece is a critical component in change and in you working well with a therapist. So yeah, not all therapists are created equal. Not all therapists who claim to be doing CBT are doing CBT. Many will take pieces of CBT, but it's not necessarily implemented. They'll kind of, those eclectic therapists, they'll take from here and here and here, which is great because there are good things to be gleaned from multiple approaches to therapy. But yeah,
and
it's
tricky. Let's say what you said before. They may not be experienced with women with ADHD.
Yes.
It
presents very differently in men. It presents very differently from kids with ADHD. It's a different beast, and they are finally doing a lot more research on it, which is great because that means we're getting newer resources and understanding the differences in how to approach
there's an annual conference that I suggest women with ADHD attend, and I suggest they recommend it to their therapists, which is the ADHD Palooza.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one just for women with ADHD.
Yes.
And it's run by ADDA. Is that correct? Let me look it up immediately so I can share the link.
Yeah. It's great. It's an online webinar you can attend.
Yeah.
It's not expensive, and they have a lot of really great speakers there.
Yeah, I think it's like $97 to have the
recordings.
Yeah,
it's great. Yeah, this is it right here. I did CBT before I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it was after I got meds for ADHD that the CBT lessons really kicked in. And that's what we were talking about.
That's exactly what we're saying.
Meds first, because they allow you to be able to learn and implement those skills. And a lot of adults who do, they get the meds on board, they learn all the skills, are able to manage either entirely without medication, depending on their situation, or just take their meds when they need to because they've developed these other skills. But very often with kids and adults, getting those meds on board is the first step because, again, you need those breaks in order to be able to start to learn those skills.
We missed the 2024 one. The ADHD Women's Palooza happened to be in April this year.
Okay.
Unfortunately, but
I believe you can still purchase recordings.
You might be able to purchase the recordings. It's ADHDpalooza.com, and they hold it every year, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I recommend all your therapists attend it too.
Yeah, and they do a few different ones too.
Yeah, there's one just on ADHD in general,
and I think
then there's the women's one. I highly recommend.
So
I've
yeah,
been attending for
great
years.
resources.
I missed the April one, unfortunately, because I had a conflict.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about antecedent control, because particularly when you're parenting, it's a big, but also for us adults, limiting the things in your environment that you know are going to. There was a comment up here. I'm going to pull it up right now because it kind of fits here. I didn't even discover, this is Amanda Lang, thanks for being here. I didn't even discover the difference between distraction and the impulse to follow the distraction until my mid 40s, because they're so tightly intertwined that I had never experienced them as separate. So this is where kind of that antecedent control can come into play, right? Minimizing those distractions so that your brain isn't jumping to all of those things. But when parenting in particular, kids with ADHD, we have to take a very different approach, right? Because they're not thinking about the consequences of their actions. Relying on just the consequences, changing that future behavior is not going to work. So while yes, it's important for those kids to learn that there are consequences that come from behavior, we can expect those consequences to change what they do next time when the behaviors are related to impulse control. And that's where, having strategies in place, in particular, controlling the environment and those antecedents, which is the thing that happens before the behavior, can
So I call this
enormously.
setting up the environment for success.
Yes.
And so this is called always having to do pre-planning, which is annoying as hell, but absolutely critical for success. So, for example, this is called, if you know you have to run errands, and whether it's for yourself or your child, and you know that running more than 2 errands is going to exhaust you or is going to make you have emotional dysregulation because it's a lot of running around and driving, you have to plan in advance. You know that day you have to do 3 errands for whatever reason. What is it that's going to help you make that more successful? You can't just say, oh, I have to do 3 errands today. Does it mean you have to build in a break? Do you have to take food with you so you eat a snack bar between the errands because that's going to give you more energy? Instead of taking water, do you need to take Gatorade or something with electrolytes because it's going to help you keep up? Do you need to build in a 10-minute break, even if you're just sitting in the car, listening to music with the air conditioning on, because that's going to give you the energy to get to the third piece? If you're taking your child, you must pack in advance several fidgets or toys or the iPad, because that's going to allow your child to get to that third errand with you. It means, and this is an impulse control issue that's really, really important, which is pre-planning. If you know going to a restaurant for dinner means your child may not eat anything on that menu, you bring food, you bring the toys, you build in, my husband and I could not eat at the same time at a restaurant until our younger son, we were able to do it until about age 4 by saying which one of us gets to eat first while the other one is walking around or soothing the child, and which one may not get to eat tonight. And then we couldn't eat in restaurants for several years because he refused restaurant food until he was about 8, literally 4 years. And so we pre-planned who got to go out to eat and who had to stay home with the kid.
Yeah.
Yesterday was a high ozone day, and it said, try to do all your errands at once. So my husband did a bad job. He planned 4 errands after a physical therapy session for our daughter. She came home and was a mess. And he did not pre-plan, did not check with her, when he should have come home after the second errand, dropped her off, and completed the last 2 errands himself. This is for my adult daughter. And so pre-planning for success is what's necessary to make these things happen. And it happens for yourself as an adult as well. If you
Yes.
know that you have to do the grocery shopping, pick up meds at the pharmacy, and do some other errand, and that's going to take you 2.5 hours, because grocery shopping always takes longer than you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to plan before you leave the house to have that Gatorade, to have a snack, take a 10-minute break in the car, and not overexhaust yourself, because when you come home, you still have to fold the laundry and cook dinner.
Well, and don't go grocery shopping hungry, right? Because we have a very
Absolutely.
hard time not doing all the impulse buys and you come home with all the junk food. So,
Right. And so
eat a little something before you
these are
go.
all strategies, that pre-planning. So I have, again, a young adult client. She's 30. And what she just got her work schedule changed. So she has 2 days off, 2 days on, 1 day off, 1 day on. And we made a schedule for her days off. And so rather than have, I'll get around to doing the cleaning, I'll get around to doing my whatever, we actually made a schedule where at 10 a.m. she's walking the dog, and at 11 a.m. she's cleaning the kitchen, and then she has lunch. And at 1 a.m. she gets to do her craft project that she's working on, because she's already started her Christmas presents. Good for her. And what she said to me at her last session is, I almost always finish early, so I have time off to watch a video or YouTube or something. I have time off in between my scheduled activities to laze around, but then I have my schedule and I know the next thing I'm supposed to do. And what happens is that instead of wasting her whole day watching YouTube or TikTok or a movie, she still gets her 3 or 4 tasks done each day. So she's not being impulsive and not wasting her whole day, but it's all about planning for success. And this is one way to
figuring out
manage
kind of those accommodations, for me, for grocery shopping, if I do an online grocery pickup, I'm less likely to make, impulsive purchasing decisions.
Which are often much more expensive and below your budget.
Yes, that's where, and because they just go, aren't paying attention. Next thing you know, your cart is up to here, and
did you actually get the things you needed versus the things you wanted?
Right. So,
online
grocery pickup and online grocery delivery, even if you are paying, an additional fee for having access, some stores, you have to pay, $25 or whatever for the grocery pickup. Guaranteed, I would spend more than $25 on impulse buys, right? So I'm still saving. Yeah, I'm still getting ahead of that. I know
you have a hard stop. So I just want to summarize the 4 strategies we've talked about.
Great.
Right? So this last one we talked about is pre-planning. Whether it's your whole day, whether it's your errands, it's planning for success, right? So several of your people are saying, yeah, they like online grocery stores too. So pre-planning is really, really important. The second one we're talking about is self-monitoring, which is paying attention if you say something inappropriate, learning to listen to it, even if you can't stop it, but then saying, I recognize I said something inappropriate, let me rephrase or apologize. It's not just letting it come out into the ether and ignoring it, but learning to self-monitor, right? That's the second one we talked about. I'm going backwards.
You're good.
The first one we talked about was mindfulness, which is spending some time in meditation, thinking about your feelings, thinking about how you want to approach your day with a positive growth mindset, which is just giving yourself the chance to put yourself in a positive attitude for the day.
And being in the present mindset. There's lots of good strategies for that, which we'll, I'm sure, talk about at some point.
So those are the 3 main things. There are lots of other interventions, but of course we could talk for hours. But
yes,
I think those 3 give, and then the 4th thing we talked about is having meds. People have talked about how in the chat, the comments about how difficult it is to find the right meds. That's a whole nother session, and we'll schedule one for that.
Yeah, we'll definitely add that to the list. Adding kind of onto that, you know, when you're talking about kind of that self-monitoring piece, if you're parenting a kid with ADHD, you know, then they don't have that ability yet, you can do that for them. And I would definitely recommend, you know, give kids that a second chance, because like, you know, I talked about before, they're saying the quiet part out loud, those things that we might normally be able to be like, oh, this is not the time to say that thing, has already come out of their mouth before they've had the ability to think about. So giving them that chance to be like, wait, is that what you really wanted to say to me right now? And let them redo it will help them to develop that ability to self-monitor. But also, you know, we tend, especially when they say something mouthy or it can get us really fast, right? Especially if we have ADHD and you have that immediate emotional reaction or rejection sensitivity and all of that is right. But we have to be able to pause ourselves and let them have another opportunity. Recognize that the ADHD might have said the thing and not them. They may not have meant it. So give them that opportunity to have a redo.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm so glad you brought that up.
All right. I've got a couple of starred comments here. Let me see. Oh, I talked about that one. All right. I gave out consequences and my kiddo doesn't, and I don't know how to teach that. I'm having a hard time understanding what you mean here, pickle nits, but hopefully we gave you a couple of strategies. If not, feel free to find me on Instagram at Nicole Miles Coaching, or Susan, you want to give your places where people can find you?
My website is drsusanblumberg.com. You can also find my handout on essential executive functioning skills. Just click a button on my website and I'll send it to you. And that's the best way to reach me.
Great. Yeah, you can find either one of us. Shoot us a DM. I'm also on Twitter a little bit, or X or whatever they're calling it.
I'm not there anymore.
Nicole Has ADHD.
Yep.
I'm not there a lot, but I do check frequently enough that if you send me a DM, I will find it. So if that's a space where you are, also, you know, leaving comments here for those of you on Replay Crew, we check them all and we will add your questions to our next live stream. We'll also pause periodically and have Q&A streams. So definitely send questions, reach out to either of us. Thank you all for being here today, and we're going to wrap up real quick. Did you have anything you wanted to say at the end? We let people know how to get a hold of you.
I love doing this. We'll see you every Tuesday.
Yes, we will be here every Tuesday at the same bat time, same bat channel. We will be, we weren't dual streaming today, but in the future we'll be streaming here and on Susan's channel, which will make sure there's links in descriptions. You can find us in a lot of places, and we're really excited to do this every week again with new topics and a great chat. So with that, I am going to run the outro, and we will see you all next time. Remember, in the meantime, you're not alone, you're not broken, and you're doing better than you think you are. And
Absolutely.
We will see you all.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. This video is not a substitute for counseling, psychotherapy, medical, or mental health care. The information and advice shared here should not be used in place of any form of diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Information provided here does not involve diagnosis or treatment of medical or mental or psychological disorders. If you feel the need for professional support, please seek a local professional in your area. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only.